Morning, everybody. Time is now 8:30 a.m. We will go back on the record on this matter. Today is the sixth day of our hearing. Today's date is April 18th. We are in docket number 2022.07.078. I would just remind the parties that we are into the merits portion of this proceeding and have moved past the settlement witnesses, and I understand from CC and Northwestern Energy that they will discuss the settlement. We had agreed at the close of yesterday to start today with Dr. Roy as our witness, and then Renewable Northwest had reserved their opening, correct? All right, shall we start there then?
Mr. President, I apologize. I missed what you said there at the very beginning when you referenced the settlement. Could you state that again, please?
Yes, we are in the cases in chief for each of the parties at this point in the proceeding.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yes, Ms. Harmon.
Sorry, one more point of clarification. Is it your intention to preclude questioning and testimony regarding the interplay of the merits issues in the settlement, or is that still?
No, that's all
Okay,
life. I just want everybody to understand where we're at in this proceeding.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Renewable Northwest specializes in renewable energy markets in Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. It works with its member organizations, which include renewable energy professionals, ratepayer advocates, and nonprofits, to engage in market development advocacy efforts to help build a connected Western electricity market. Renewable Northwest has submitted in this proceeding the testimony of Dr. Sashwat Roy. Dr. Roy's pre-filed testimony focused on the reliability rider and its role in the allocation of capital and variable costs associated with the Yellowstone County Generating Station. Dr. Roy's testimony also addressed the rider's implications for future asset acquisitions by Northwestern. Dr. Roy's testimony is also pertinent to the proposed settlement agreement that's currently before you due to its analysis of the following issues. First, Northwestern's capacity assessment methodology, with particular focus on how it justified its need for firm capacity resources based on the 2019 Electric Supply Resource Procurement Plan and 2020 supplement to that plan, which led it to select the Yellowstone County Generating Station. Second, Dr. Roy's testimony focuses on Northwestern's capacity contribution methodology, specifically the inputs and assumptions underlying its capacity needs assessment and how that assessment was influenced by an isolationist approach that failed to account for regional resource build out and wholesale market dynamics in the Western US, resulting in selection of a resource that exceeds the actual capacity needs and risks becoming an expensive stranded asset. Third, Dr. Roy's testimony addresses data on regional resource adequacy based on recent studies and modeling efforts that Northwestern failed to adequately consider during the RFP process that led to selection of the Yellowstone County Generating Station. Based on these analyses, it is Renewable Northwest's position that Northwestern's analysis and methodology supporting use of the rider and selection of the Yellowstone County Generating Station to meet its perceived capacity needs was based on an incomplete picture. As a result, development of the Yellowstone County Generating Station and inclusion of any of its capital or operating costs in consumer rates prior to a comprehensive rate case review is likely to result in considerably higher rates than would Northwestern's continued use of spot market purchases as it has historically used, or acquisition of less expensive capacity resources when combined with those spot market purchases. For these resources, Renewable Northwest respectfully requests that if the commission is to deny the settlement agreement, it should also deny the reliability rider portion of Northwestern's application because it is not just and reasonable. Renewable Northwest also encourages the commission to carefully consider Dr. Roy's testimony and the points that I've just raised in its consideration of the settlement agreement that is currently before it.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to call your witness?
Yes, Mr. President, I call Dr. Sashwat Roy.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Roy. Have you been sworn in this matter?
Not yet.
Okay, I cannot see you on the screen, so I'm just going to take your word for it. Can you raise your right hand, please, sir? You swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's your witness.
Dr. Roy, could you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Sure. It's Sashwat Roy, Sashwat, and the last name is Roy, Roy.
And could you please state your employer and title?
I'm employed by Renewable Northwest. I'm the technology and policy manager.
And can you provide your business address, please?
Sure. It's 425 Southwest 6th Avenue, Portland, Oregon.
Okay, and did you file testimony in this docket?
Yes, I did.
Do you have before you what have been pre-marked as Renewable Northwest Exhibits 1, 2, and 39?
Yes, I do.
Is Renewable Northwest 1 a true and accurate copy of your direct testimony in this matter?
Yes.
And is Renewable Northwest 2 a true and accurate copy of Exhibit A to your testimony?
Yes, it is.
Can you explain what that Exhibit A is?
The Exhibit A is a recently conducted regional resource adequacy model, which shows that with the recent capacity additions across the West does not face an impending doom or a capacity shortfall in the future.
Thank you. Is Renewable Northwest Exhibit number 39 a true and accurate copy of your cross-intervenor testimony in this matter?
Yes, it is.
If I were to ask you the same questions today as are in your direct and cross-intervenor testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, it would.
Do you have any corrections to make to your testimony?
No.
Mr. President, I move to admit Renewable Northwest Exhibit number 1.
Any objection to the admission of Renewable Northwest Exhibit 1? Seeing no objection, Renewable Northwest number 1 is admitted.
And I now would move to admit Renewable Northwest Exhibit number 2, Attachment A to Dr. Roy's testimony.
All right, is there any objection to Renewable Northwest Exhibit 2? Seeing none, Renewable Northwest Exhibit 2 is admitted.
And finally, I will move to admit Renewable Northwest Exhibit number 39, which is Dr. Roy's cross-intervenor testimony.
Any objection to Renewable number 39? Seeing no objection, Renewable number 39 is admitted.
Okay, I now tender Dr. Roy for cross-examination.
All right, very good. Good morning, Dr. Roy. Just some housekeeping matters. I just remind the parties that we will, of course, break for public comment at 9 o'clock. I don't know if you've been informed of that, Dr.
Yes.
Roy. But
Yes.
we'll have to take a break. And then is Ms. Trinnell on line? Ms. Trinnell, are you on? Okay. Northwestern Energy Cross.
No cross-examination.
Okay, Mr. Brown notified us yesterday morning that he would be absent until 9:30 today. Let the record reflect that. Mr. Nelson? Captain Duffy? Ms. Trinnell? HRC? Mr. Uda? May I see? Okay. Thank you. This will be the time for commissioner questioning. Vice President Fielder,
No questions, Mr. President.
Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Panoche. Commissioner Bukacek.
Two related questions, Mr. President.
Okay, go ahead.
Dr. Roy, do you agree with the following, that when a modeling system, when a modeling system is being created, the systems engineer decides what aspects of the system are most important, and those become the focus of data entry into the model?
I would say thank you for the question, first of all. I would say in modeling, it's not what is most important, but the accuracy and integrity of the data and the methodology is the most important aspects. And based on that, whatever results you get, if your model is accurate, your data is accurate as well, you'll get the fair result of what you want to model generally.
Can you, Dr. Roy, you cut out right there.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Did
Sure.
you pick up from, you get the,
I can repeat myself. So it doesn't depend like what are the most important aspects of the model, but the data should be accurate and the modeling methodology should be correct for the model to output fair results.
Okay, very good. So would you agree that accuracy and integrity of the data could be controversial? There could be different opinions in terms of accuracy and integrity of the data?
There could be different organizations that are putting out different data, but the accuracy of the data could be judged by the organizational itself, its reputation, and the previous work that it has done on the topic.
Okay, thank you. And I'm very familiar with medical models. I've been dealing with them for over 40 years. So, and medicine is supposed to be considered to be an objective science and that kind of thing, but I'm very familiar with how the chosen information is entered can definitely bias outcome. So based on that, I think it's appropriate. I mean, I've seen some really strange outcomes from medical models that defy all common sense. So it's appropriate to question potential bias of Northwestern Energy's capacity contribution methodology. That's appropriate. My question, I think it's my last question. Would you might not agree with this, alternative models that could show a different outcome regarding capacity need? Is there potential that there could be outcomes equally biased depending on the data focus and entry?
If you're asking that, is it possible to get different results with different methodologies? I think that is correct. But if you're looking at something from a public good perspective, which electricity is, I think there needs to be a lot of focus on where the data is coming from and whether the methodology is correct or not, because we're dealing with something which is a public good.
So you don't think there could be an outcome that's equally biased in a different direction to what Northwestern has come up with?
I'm not sure what you mean by equally biased, but it could put out different results, which may be because the data that was inputted into the model was incomplete or it was different, basically. So there could be a possibility where they put out different outputs. But I think based on, the reputation of where the data is coming from, whether they have a past history of producing results that have matched historic or that have matched future outcomes, I think that makes the model portray correct results if your data and the methodology is correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Bukacek. Good morning, Dr. Roy.
Good morning.
This is James Brown. I'm the president of the Public Service Commission. I have several questions for you. Thank you for your testimony this morning. Dr. Roy, have you reviewed Northwestern Energy's original proposed revenue requirement in this matter?
No.
Do you have any opinion then whether the proposed revenue requirement in Northwestern Energy's rebuttal testimony is just and reasonable?
I have no opinion on that as of now.
Okay. Have you reviewed Northwestern Energy's original proposed rate design in this matter?
I did a preliminary review, but I don't have any opinion on that either.
Okay. That's all the questions I have, Dr. Roy. Thank you for your time. Mr. Hamilton?
No questions.
Okay, since there was no cross-examination questions, do you want to redirect?
Yes, just a couple of questions, Mr. President. Dr. Roy, going to Commissioner Bukacek's questions. I want to start with this one. Is it fair to say that based on your analysis, that the model inputs that Northwestern used led it to select an expensive gas-fired power plant as opposed to some other capacity resource?
Yes, as I mentioned in my pre-file direct testimony, the methodology that Northwestern used was incomplete because it did not account for regional resource buildouts and regional market imports in selecting or in assessing their capacity need. In their RFP process, they failed to consider these factors, which led to an overstated capacity need. In addition to that, the modeling methodology used a tiered duration structure, or what they call the ride-through structure, which was discussed previously in this hearing. The ride-through structure basically creates three duration tiers, which is very unique to how Northwestern portrayed this methodology, and this has not been conducted across utilities in the country, actually. So the methodology was unique, and the methodology was also incomplete in some aspects.
And can you explain why your analysis as presented in your testimony was not similarly biased, for example, in favor of renewable resources as opposed to thermal resources?
Any analysis or any references that I presented in my testimony have been derived from resources which have been used for the past 30 to 40 years, including public sector organizations that are working, have been working over the past to provide accurate and ensure data integrity, including organizations like EIA, NREL, Western Electricity Coordinating Council, or WEC. So relying on those data, I think, ensures that the analysis is not biased or flawed.
And then this is my last question. Can you just briefly explain to the commission the reliability of data and modeling with respect to renewable energy resources and their ability to meet peaking needs?
So in terms of reliability of and modeling itself, renewable resources, and I would put energy storage resources in that category. Right now, there are a lot of different, there are a few different models that try to forecast renewable energy into the future using historical data. There are a lot of good reputable sources on wind and solar data, which can be used by utilities to project how much solar and wind generation they can project into the future. And Similarly, with respect to energy storage resources, initially, a few years back, there was a sense that storage is new, but with more storage coming online in the past few years, there has been a lot of progress made in how energy storage is getting dispatched in different summer and winter season, and what kind of reliability they can provide to the system. Reliability, and I would add firm capacity as well.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. I don't have any further questions, Mr. President.
All right. Would you like to permanently excuse this witness?
Yes, Mr. President, I would.
All right. Is there any objection to permanently excusing this witness? Seeing none, Dr. Roy, thank you for your time this morning. We appreciate your testimony. You are permanently excused.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Okay, we have 9 minutes before public comment, and I think we could probably squeeze in at least the introduction of the next witness, Northwestern Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Northwestern calls Miss Elaine Rich.
Morning, Ms. Rich.
Miss Rich, have you been sworn in?
No, I have not.
Can you pull that microphone right up to your?
Is that better?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Rich. I understand you have not been sworn in.
I have not.
Okay, would you raise your right hand? Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, you're a witness.
Good morning. Could you please state your name and business address for the record?
Elaine Rich, that's ELAINE RICH. And my business address, is that right? 11 East Park.
Can everyone hear, or do you need to lean in? You're heard. You're okay. By whom are you employed?
Northwestern Energy,
What is your title?
Assistant Controller.
Did you submit pre-filed testimony in this docket?
I did.
Are you adopting the pre-filed testimony of Mr. Andrew Durkin?
I am.
Do you have the testimony before you?
I do.
So do you have before you the testimony identified as the pre-filed direct testimony of Andrew D. Durkin and the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Elaine A. Rich?
I do.
Do you have any corrections to either of those testimonies?
I do. I have correction to the direct and to the rebuttal.
Could you walk us through, starting with the direct?
Sure. For the direct, the NCC and MPSC tax adjustments should have reflected a decrease of $245,411 rather than the $244,803 amount. This correction was noted in response to data request MCC 03.
And is that on page of Mr. Durkin's testimony? Is that on page ADD 32, line 19?
It is.
Mr. Chairman, do we need to repeat any of that, or that's in, are we good to go forward with the next correction?
Well, I would ask the court reporter. Okay, please move forward.
Could you walk us through the corrections on rebuttal?
Yes, on the rebuttal, page 22, line 3, the prior 3-year average number of open positions should read prior 4-year average number of open positions.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Andrew D. Durkin as adopted by Ms. Rich be moved into evidence as NWE Exhibit 40. As amended.
Thank you. Any objection to NWE 40 as amended? Seeing none, NWE 40 as amended is admitted.
And I move to admit the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Ms. Rich as NWE Exhibit 41, and that testimony is as amended as well.
Any objection to NWE 41 as amended? Seeing none, NWE 41 as amended is admitted.
I tender this witness for cross-examination.
Okay. I think maybe we can move through the settling parties, if you will. Again, Mr. Brown is excused this morning until 9:30. Mr. Nelson. Captain Duffy? Okay, why don't we stop here, go off the record for 5 minutes. If you need to get a coffee, drink of water or whatever, we'll do that. And then we'll come back on the record at 9 for public comment. Time is now 8:56. We'll take a 4-minute break. We move off the record.
Monica, are you calling in right now? You should be allowed to talk if you are dialing in.
Yeah, sorry, I was not able to be unmuted on the other end, but I'll go on mute now.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
All right, time is now 9:01 a.m. We will go back on the record at this point. We are going to move out of the evidentiary portion of our hearing and into the public comment portion of our hearing. For those that have not listened for the last 6 days, we will do public comment in order. We're going to start with persons who are appearing in person, and we will call on you by the order in which you signed up with the commission. I would just remind everybody before you provide public comment that when you come to the podium, please state and spell your name for the record, identify where you're from. And we are limiting public comment to 3 minutes each. So let's start with our first in-person public commenter, Mr. Michael Weibel. Come forward, Mr. Weibel. Morning, welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Speak right into the microphone if you would.
Thank you. Well, good morning. As stated, I'm Michael Weibel. I'm account manager with Altec Industries and resident of Montana for more than 19 years. We are based out of Birmingham, Alabama, and Altec is the largest manufacturer of industrial machinery and equipment, including bucket trucks, aerials, digger derricks, and cranes. Our private company is worldwide, including investor-owned. We deal with investor-owned utilities such as Northwestern Energy, 25 electric cooperatives throughout the state of Montana, the state of Montana Department of Transportation, City of Billings, Helena, Missoula, along with MDU and federal entities such as WAPA and Boeing, along with Montana State University and Montana Tech. I'm here to briefly comment on behalf of our partner, Northwestern Energy, who we have had provided equipment service, safety training, and other utility solutions for more than 40 years. Northwestern Energy's focus on investments to their system assets and technology continues to ensure reliability and efficiency for their customers and safety for their employees, which is unquestionably outstanding through my experience in working with Northwestern. Northwestern is our largest customer in the region, and our company has likewise grown throughout Montana. We now employ 6 mobile service technician mechanics and managers to better serve our customers, including Northwestern. And lastly, Altec is anticipating in the coming years to add a service center in the state to employ more Altec service professionals, which we can better take care of our customers while leading to improved service, less downtime, reduced cost, and improved equipment reliability for all of our customers. And finally, managing equipment acquisition cost, as mentioned, reliability, safety, and environmental preservation are pillars amongst our relationship with Northwestern Energy. In recent years, Altec has partnered with them to introduce hybrid job site efficiency equipment to significantly reduce greenhouse emissions while maintaining idle or mitigating idle time and fuel usage and costs at the job site. Northwestern is committed to both innovation and environmentally friendly equipment, and Altec moving forward is fully on board to support their green fleet objectives and initiatives. In closing, I fully support our relationship with Northwestern, and we look forward to continuing to manufacturing reliable equipment that meets their expectations from a safety, operational, and service standpoint. Thank you, Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Weibel. Before you leave the podium, would you spell your last name for the record, please?
I apologize for that. Last name is Weibel, W-E-I, B as in brother, L-E.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Weibel, for your time this morning. All right. Our next public commenter is Mark Bonamarte. Please come forward. Welcome. State and spell your name for the record.
B-O-N-A-M-A-R-T-E. Just here, I don't have a lot of data points, but we do work for Northwest Energy. We have a small family business, Ultimate Landscape and Site Repair. We started back with them in 2010. And for our business to make it, we had to put 4 rate increases against Northwest Energy, just so that we can prosper. I have another place in Florida, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, but they came into my yard and they tore up my irrigation system, my yard. And when I asked when they'd go back and fix it, they said, that's your responsibility. You're on our easement. Northwest Energy fixes everything that they touch with the customer. And they ask us to do it better than when they first walked in. When we first started with Northwest Energy, we were one of 4 companies. Now we are the only company servicing Northwest Energy. And I believe it's because our prices are fair. I don't mind paying a little extra money for Northwest Energy utility services if they can keep producing the quality of repairs and service that they produce to Montana. I live in Bozeman. We're one of the largest areas that Northwest Energy spends money on. In the state, they spent over $1 billion already last year. And I don't have the exact numbers, but a rate increase for them, I think for them to continue is beneficial for the entire state of Montana. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Bonamarte.
Bonamarte.
Yeah, Bonamarte.
You got it right.
All right. Well, thanks for your time and we appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Mr. Mark Runkle. Good morning, Mr. Runkle. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Okay, thank you. Mark, Runkle. And I'm the developer of Mountain View Meadows at the southeast part of Helena. We've been doing this for about 20 years and worked with Northwestern Energy for all of that time. My experience with the people there and with their work is that they've always been courteous, professional, and very competent to the last one. They've been very responsive and very reliable in installing our infrastructure. You know, we put in miles of electric lines and gas lines and that kind of thing. And of course, they also have to hook up all the houses as they're built. So we look at them as a valued partner in our business. And I know that it's difficult for all of us to see a rate increase on anything, but you know, we've seen it with our business that it's just so hard to hold the line on these costs. And even though I hate to see this for our residents, on the other hand, we need a strong electric company. And I think Northwestern Energy is well managed and good at what they do and professional. And so I'd like for them to be able to have the resources to stay that way. So I appreciate a chance to at least express that to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Uncle. All right, our next public commenter is Rebecca Ryland. Morning, welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Ryland. Last name is spelled Ryland. I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization, the Experimental Theater Cooperative, which I founded in 1991. I want to first thank Northwestern Energy for being a supporter of the arts in the communities in which it serves. And I am also the director of design at Mountain View Meadows. I want to express my appreciation to Northwestern Energy for swapping out the LED lighting to LED lighting in our street lamps. And I'm here in support of the rate increase so that Northwestern Energy has the opportunity to continue to invest in new technologies and to support the development of renewable resources, which we will all benefit and in which we all need to contribute if we are going to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ryland. Are there any other public commenters in the room which have not signed up? Any other public commenters in the room? Seeing none, we will move to online commenters. Our first online commenter is Mr. Larry Evans. Mr. Evans, are you on with us?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Thank you. Yes, Larry Evans, EVANS. I am the general manager with the Davy Tree Surgery Company. I'm here to provide comment in support of the Northwestern Energy rate review filing with the Montana Public Service Commission for regulatory rate review of electrical and natural gas services. Davy Tree Surgery Company is a proponent of the regulatory rate review request. Davy is an employee-owned company. We provide utility vegetation management services that are critical to Northwestern Energy's distribution, transmission, and electrical services safety, reliability, and resilience. These services include managing trees and other vegetation located near power lines required to meet regulatory and compliance requirements. Northwest Energy's utility vegetation management program is intended to reduce risk of vegetation-caused power outages and wildfire risk. To support what Northwestern Energy's distribution transmission electrical system safety and reliability and manage risk that could impact employees, communities, and Northwestern Energy, Davy invests into employee safety and maintains a highly trained and qualified workforce through good paying union jobs. Our Montana employees live in the communities they work in. In addition to supporting and being a proponent of Northwestern Energy rate review, we believe that our clients' sustainability allows Davy to maintain and invest into our Montana employees and keep our pace with continually increases in wages, goods, services, insurance, and equipment costs that are critical in maintaining our ability to serve Montana as a sustainable utility vegetation management contractor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Evans, for your time this morning. Our next online commenter is Mr. Chase Norland. Mr. Norland.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Chase Norlin, ChaseNorlin. Thanks for allowing myself the opportunity to speak this morning. As stated, my name is Chase Norlin, and I'm the Vice President of Operations for PAR Western Line Contractors, a subsidiary of Quanta Services. Quanta Services is a leading specialty contractor with a highly trained, skilled workforce, providing fully integrated infrastructure solutions for the electric power, underground utility, and communications industries. We have long been a trusted partner of Northwestern Energy over 25 years, and Quanta companies operating in Northwestern Energy's territory employ hundreds of residents who work daily to safely deliver critical infrastructure projects on their behalf. Approval of Northwestern Energy's rate case application will enable them to make critical investments to ensure safe, reliable, and sustainable energy is available to all communities within its service territory, including Montana. With the majority of current infrastructure in the system nearing the end of its useful life cycle, the aggressive upgrades needed to support resiliency, fire hardening, as well as the integration of renewable energy into the existing grid, Northwestern Energy's rate case contains key provisions in line with addressing these items. With the inflationary environment we have seen, specifically in the last 3 years, the cost of doing business have continued to rise. We are continually evaluating alternative options, methods, and technologies as a contractor to ensure costs are cut out wherever available. But it's no secret that a dollar today does not have the same buying power as a dollar a half decade ago. Quanta Services and our locally based workforce remain ready and committed to working with Northwestern Energy to achieve existing infrastructure maintenance, new growth implementation, and we urge the PSC's approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Norland. Okay, we have a latecomer. Mr. Tyler. Hi, good morning. Welcome. Please come to the podium. State and spell your name for the record. We're limiting public comment to 3 minutes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Tyler, Jontyler, area manager with Heath Consultants, a contractor for Northwestern Energy here in Montana. Thanks for allowing me to be here and speak on their behalf. Heath Consultants Incorporated is a third-generation woman-owned business enterprise surveying the natural gas industry for the past 90 years. Heath is headquartered in Houston, Texas, and employs over 1,700 employees across the United States. We are an equipment manufacturer with product line costing consisting of various methane emission excuse me, consisting of various methane emission detection devices, as well as our service provider. Our services include pipeline leak detection, methane emission detection, damage prevention, pipe locating, and meter reading and meter services. We provide pipeline leak survey detection services to Northwestern Energy and the Montana community for the past 2 decades, or excuse me, the past 2 decades. As a service provider for the past 3 years, these past 3 years have been some of the most challenging market conditions of our past, of our 90-year history. Our 2 largest expense categories are related to labor and our vehicle fleet. Heath has taken numerous steps to manage our cost effectively in order to maintain cost effectiveness for our customers who serve the general public. Those efforts include raising technician compensation regionally based on the current labor market data in order to ensure adequate staffing to maintain compliance within pipeline safety regulations. Improved employee benefits package in order to improve overall compensation packages. Improving management training programs with an anticipated increase in employee retention. Updating our vehicle fleet to newer, more fuel-efficient models. Implementing fleet telematics alerts to monitor vehicle idling in order to reduce vehicle costs. Implemented work management software to better monitor and improve employee performance matrices. And we've also negotiated competitive rates with local hotels to support our seasonal workforce in Montana in order to pass along the most cost-effective rates to the Montana ratepayer. Heath appreciates the opportunity to present our local challenges and steps taken to address. We remain committed to supporting our natural gas partners and communities as they serve by focusing on safe, high quality, and on-time services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. All right, last call. Any public commenters in the room? Any public commenters online? Seeing none. All right. Time is 9:18 a.m. We will move out of the public comment portion and back onto the record for our evidentiary portion of our hearing. Ms. Trinnell, can you hear me?
I can hear, I can't, I don't have any questions. Thanks, Mr. President.
Okay, so before we go there, all right, thank you, Mr. Nell. All right, so Mr. Nell, we had left off with cross-examination of Elaine Rich. Do you have any questions for this witness, Mr. Nell?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. HRC? Saruta?
I have a few questions, Mr. President. Most of these were directed to Andrew Durkin. I understand that Ms. Rich has adopted Mr. Durkin's testimony, so these questions will be directed to her. Good morning, Ms. Rich. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Glad to hear it. Could you please refer to Northwestern's response to data request BRP 15D and E and to data request BRP 16B and E? And why don't you, in case you haven't read these recently, why don't you take a few minutes to read the question and your answers?
And you said 15.
15D and E
D
and
and-
16B and E.
And I'm sorry, which one's of 16 again?
16B and E.
E and E.
Correct.
Okay. Think I'm ready.
So you had adequate time to review.
If I need more, I'll pause again.
Okay. First question is, do you agree that in those data responses, Northwestern indicates that transmission network upgrade costs associated with the Yellowstone County generating station will be recovered from Northwestern's retail customers as part of its overall transmission revenue requirement?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you confirm that network upgrade costs for the Yellowstone County generating station will not be included as part of Northwestern's PCAM filings?
I can confirm.
Okay. And also, those costs, network upgrade costs, will not be recovered through Northwestern's proposed reliability rider. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you agree that Northwestern is not including costs related to Yellowstone County generating station in its proposed revenue requirement in this case, but is suggesting that recovery of such costs would be subject to a prudency review by the commission at the time Northwestern proposes to include such costs in its rates, either through the PCAM or through the reliability rider or through rate-based recovery? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Would the electric transmission network upgrade costs associated with the Yellowstone plant be subject to a prudency review before the Montana Commission, or instead are those costs subject to FERC jurisdiction rather than to the PSC's jurisdiction?
That would depend on which customers that would pertain to. We do the transmission revenue requirement in total for both the FERC side in order to charge the customers that apply to that. And then we also have a revenue credit on the retail side. So depending on the customers and whether they're wholesale or retail, that's where that would be recovered.
So there would be a cost allocation as between the wholesale transmission level customers and Northwestern's retail customers. Is that correct?
I don't know if I would call it a cost allocation. Thinking further about that on the wholesale side, because it is a full rate, but it's only applied to the wholesale customers, then they get their portion of that rate. On the retail side, the revenues that we get from wholesale are a revenue credit to the retail customers.
Okay. At what time would Northwestern seek to include costs related to electric transmission network upgrades associated with Yellowstone plant in its transmission revenue requirement and transmission rates?
For those that would come up after this rate case would be included into the next rate case.
Okay, when you say the next rate case, I just want to make sure we're clear. Are you referring to a rate case in front of this commission, or are you referring to FERC?
So the rate case for the retail customers, it would be in our next general rate review filing. For the wholesale customers, we do a formula rate template every year.
Okay. So when Northwestern would make a filing with this commission for rate recovery for those electric transmission network upgrade costs, how would those costs be allocated as between the FERC rate adjustment, which is, as I understand it, is formulaic essentially, and specific costs to be recovered from Montana ratepayers?
Could you repeat your question?
Sure. I don't think it was a great question. So what I'm trying to figure out is, as I understand it, you have this template that you have at FERC and costs go into that, and it essentially generates, as a result of that, the allocation and assignment of costs to various customer classes. Is that correct?
On the wholesale, so the formula rate template, it determines the rate that is charged to the wholesale customers.
Right. And what I'm trying to unpack, Ms. Rich, is okay, so that happens every year. And I think you would agree with me, it may be the case that Northwestern doesn't get around to having another rate case before that FERC case takes place, or the formulaic rate adjustment takes place. Is that right?
You mean on the retail side?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. So what I'm trying to unpack is, so you have this formulaic rate adjustment that takes place at FERC, and then you later have a rate case, a general rate case in front of the commission, and you assign some of those costs. Does the formulaic template determine the allocation as between wholesale and retail customers?
That's not correct, the way that I view it. On the FERC formula rate template, that determines a rate that is charged to our wholesale customers. On the retail side, we have a revenue credit for the revenues that we receive under those rates. And then that ensures that we're not charging our retail customers more, since the portion of that system or our costs and our revenue requirement are covered by our wholesale revenues.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. I want to make sure I understand this. So you have the formulaic rates that dictates a result for wholesale customers. And then you credit some portion of that back to Montana customers, retail customers. So how does that work in practice? I mean, is there just an increment of that total cost that's credited back to customers, or is that subject to rate review, on a fact-specific basis by this commission?
As we see in this rate case, we have the FERC revenues, so the FERC revenue credit, and that is based on a 3-year average, as Glenda Gibson had spoke when she testified earlier.
Okay. Would natural gas pipeline upgrade costs associated with the Yellowstone plant, such as costs needed to upgrade the Byron pipeline, be treated, be treated similarly to the electric transmission upgrade costs?
I think I'll need you to repeat that because I think there might have been two things mixed up.
Okay, that's possible. What I'm asking is, so we have natural gas pipeline upgrade costs associated with the Yellowstone plant. Is that correct?
Natural gas, or did you say upgrade costs or
Yes.
network upgrade costs? Those are not in the
No,
Yellowstone.
No, I guess I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Are there pipeline transmission costs associated with service to the Yellowstone plant?
Yes, there is.
And so my question is really actually fairly simple. I just wanted to know from a rate treatment or a rate case design, would this follow a similar pattern to what is supposed to be done or is planned to be done with respect to the electric transmission upgrade costs?
Not sure if I fully understand.
Okay, so let me put it this way. Okay, so we've established that there are natural gas transmission costs associated with the Yellowstone plant, correct? Okay, so my question really is this also—
Ms. Rich, you have to verbalize your answers.
Oh, yes.
Excuse me, Mr. President.
Mhm.
So my question is there a similar formulaic mechanism on the gas side at the FERC level that accounts for those transmission costs associated with the Yellowstone plant?
I apologize. I must not be getting the gist of this one. Could you repeat that again?
Sure. Okay, so we established that on the electric side, you have a formula. The formula determines essentially the wholesale rates based on this 3-year average that you're talking about. And then from that, a credit is assigned back to Montana's Northwestern's Montana retail customers. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay, what I'm trying to get at is on the gas side, is there a similar mechanism or how does that work?
If I restate that, do you mean that in the electric side, we have FERC revenue credits? Do we have some on the gas side?
Correct.
Okay. From the extent of my knowledge, with stepping into this halfway through the process, we do not obviously have a FERC side for that. That is electric only. We do have some contracts on the transport side that would, I believe, be considered a revenue credit, but I will say I'm not as close to that.
Okay, is it fair to say this particular part of Mr. Durkin's testimony is not your area of expertise?
For the gas side, I would say that's probably correct.
Okay. Let's move on then. Do you know, and this may be another area that is outside of your normal, what do the English say, kit? Would upgrade costs for the Byron pipeline needed for it to deliver natural gas to Yellowstone County Generating Station be included in any Montana PSC prudency review as for cost recovery for the plant, or do you know?
What I can say for Byron, whether it's serving, right, we know it will serve more than Yellowstone, that in this rate review filing for the plant that went into service in 2022, it was included as a normalizing adjustment. Because it's at a simple average, only half of that plant that came in 2022 would be included in this rate review.
Okay, so of the total capacity of the Byron pipeline, what percentage of it is dedicated to serve Yellowstone as opposed to any other purpose?
That's outside of my expertise.
Okay. Are any of the costs associated with the Byron pipeline subject to FERC jurisdictional revenue requirements, or do you know?
That's outside of my expertise.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Ms. Rich.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Uda. Renewable Northwest.
Just a couple questions, if I may, Ms. Rich. Melissa Hornbein for Renewable Northwest. I'm wondering if you could speak to the issue of who foots the bill, essentially, if the modeling supporting the building of the Yellowstone County Generating Station is wrong. In other words, if it's skewed in favor of investor profits, do the ratepayers pay or do the investors pay?
Well, first, I'd have to say that that's not in this rate review filing. So it's not part of this revenue requirement.
Okay. Secondly, and if you know, could you state what the revenue requirements are for a coal strip?
Let me look to the exhibit here.
Thank you.
May take me a minute to find. There's a lot of paperwork.
Okay.
Oh, excuse me. I was looking at the original. I should have been looking at rebuttal. Okay, so. So that's on page 57 of 127 pages, exhibit EAR 3.
And could you state what that revenue requirement is?
We have a required revenue increase of 5,196,084.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, MEIC, Mr. Helly. Okay. Time for commissioner questions. Vice President Fielder,
Questions?
Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Panochi. Commissioner Bukacek.
No questions, Mr. President.
I don't have any questions for this witness. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a few, and apologies in advance because we're going to move through some different exhibits. I'll try to be as clear as possible about it. Could we start though with Mr. Durkin's direct testimony?
Okay.
At page 46.
Okay.
All right. On page 46 of Mr. Durkin's direct testimony, he states that the natural gas production step down to the revenue requirement ordered in a previous commission final order is still appropriate. Is that correct?
Let me read that just briefly. Yes.
Could you now refer to exhibit ADD 11?
Okay.
So in exhibit ADD 11, Mr. Durkin provided the annual percentage reduction for the production revenue requirement and the actual step down revenue requirement for the years 2023 through 2032. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you provided an update to those percentages, correct?
Correct.
And that update is shown in exhibit EAR 7. Is that correct?
Believe so.
Would you mind pulling that exhibit out too?
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm going to just, your paralegal's name,
Bobby.
Bobby. Greetings. You do a great job.
She does.
And in many hearings, would you mind just staying maybe right next to the witness during this portion? I'd appreciate it, Bobby. Thank you. All right, Ms. Rich.
Okay.
Ms. Rich, before we dive into that exhibit, I suppose, would you agree with me that the settlement agreement is silent on the matter of the step down?
I was not part of the settlement agreement, so I could not say specifically for that.
Okay. Is it your position though? Is it Northwestern's position that the step down is still appropriate?
That is what was stated in Andy's testimony that I adopted.
Okay. So the production revenue requirement step down update, which you presented in EAR 7, exhibit EAR 7, was based on your rebuttal proposed production revenue requirement of $22 million. Is that correct?
I believe so. That number sounds familiar to me, and it was updated based on the revenue requirement.
Okay. Could I now refer you to the settlement agreement and in particular exhibit B?
Good thing I have my glasses on.
It is a small print. Under the heading of fixed excluding property taxes, there's a column labeled production. Do you see that column?
Yes.
And at the bottom of that column, well, near the bottom of that column, you see the total revenue requirement, correct?
Correct.
And so the stipulated revenue requirement for natural gas production is $20,878,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in that same document, under the heading property taxes, there's also a column for production. Correct?
Yes.
And the total revenue requirement for production property taxes is $854,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if we add those two numbers together, the $20,878,000 and the $854,000, we would get a total revenue requirement for production that is roughly $21.7 million.
Approximately. Mhm.
Okay, and that is a reduction from your rebuttal proposed revenue requirement. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Would you agree with me, subject to check? As much as I don't like that, but
Yeah.
subject to check, it's
Subject to
about
check.
$276,000 lower.
Subject to check, but yes.
Okay. So referring again to Exhibit B of the settlement agreement, would you agree that the natural gas production revenue requirement proposed in the settlement agreement reflects the 2022 production revenue requirement?
Say that again, please.
Does the settlement agreement there reflect the 2022 production revenue requirement?
To clarify, my brain goes to the revenue requirement calculation, and the known and measurable will be in the 2022 period, and included in that is the step down.
Okay. So then could I refer you to page 39 of your rebuttal testimony?
Okay.
And on that page, you show the 2023 step down to be a negative 3.4%. Is that correct?
Correct.
So would you agree that the roughly $21.733 million in the 2022 production revenue requirement shown in Exhibit B of the settlement agreement should be reduced for the 2023 year by the negative 3.4% step down here?
State that again, please.
Sure. Would you agree that for the year 2023, the Exhibit B total production revenue requirement should be stepped down by 3.4%?
While I haven't been as close to this, it appears to me that that would be in the 2023 period.
Okay. All right. Now I'd like to shift gears off of natural gas production, step down to labor corrections and some open positions adjustments. Could I refer you to your rebuttal exhibit EAR 3 and let me know when you're there?
This is a big exhibit.
It is, and so I'll try to direct you to the specific page and lines that I'm referring to. And in particular, we'll start on page 4. Column AC.
Yes.
At the bottom of that column, I believe there is a revenue requirement increase reflected, right?
Correct.
And this is a revenue requirement increase for electric transmission and distribution utility, correct?
Correct.
And that amount is $195,000, well, a little bit more than that, but is that correct?
Correct.
All right, so that's an increase to the revenue requirement. Could we now refer to page 52 of that exhibit?
I'm there.
And on column AD, there's also an adjustment for labor corrections and open position updates to the generation, including CU4, correct?
Correct.
And that is a downward adjustment of $58,000, closer to $59,000.
Correct.
And so between those two adjustments, there's a net increase of about $137,000. Okay.
Yes.
Now I'd like to do the same thing for the natural gas side. So could I refer you to EAR 4?
Okay.
And we'll start on page 5.
I'm there.
And column Z
Correct.
At the bottom of column Z, so column Z, right, is the adjustment for labor corrections and open position updates.
Yes.
And at the bottom of that, we show a revenue requirement increase of $71,000,
Yes.
a little bit more than that. But all right.
Yes.
And then let's refer to page 70.
And there.
Column Z on page 70 now shows the natural gas production revenue requirement adjustment for labor corrections and open position updates. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that adjustment is an increase of $16,535.
It is.
Okay. So in the net, the total electric revenue requirement would increase by just shy of $137,000. And the gas revenue requirement would increase by a combined $87,000.
Yes.
Okay. Is it correct that these adjustments are adjustments to the initial electric and natural gas revenue requirements that Northwestern proposed?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have access to Mr. Higgins's testimony from LCG?
Okay.
All right. So let's turn to page 14 and start at line 13.
Okay.
Have you had a chance to review this testimony before the hearing?
I have
Okay.
been a little bit since I've gone back, but I have reviewed it.
Fair enough. If you need to refresh your recollection there of what Mr. Higgins testified to, please feel free. But would you agree that in total, in this answer that's posed beginning on line 13, Mr. Higgins has proposed two adjustments, one of which was to correct an error in Northwestern's initial filing?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And could you describe for me the purpose of the second correction or adjustment that he proposed?
I'll read his. Says, I also made a minor correction to include certain adjustments made by Northwestern to the PACE labor expenses that were omitted without explanation from Northwestern's totals.
Can you describe for me what a PACE labor expense is, if you know?
I actually do not know.
Okay. Just below where you read, I believe he specifies the overall reduction for, this is the electric utility, right? So what do you see where he recommends the overall reduction?
I do.
And what does that amount?
$705,560.
Okay. So that addressed the electric revenue requirement. Could you now refer to page 49 of Mr. Higgins's testimony?
I'm there.
All right, starting on line 5 and continuing through that full page, we're making the same adjustments here to the natural gas side as we just discussed for the electric side. Is that correct?
Read it real quick.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and if you'll turn the page, you can see the total adjustment that Mr. Higgins proposed. Would you agree with me that it's a little shy of $180,000 in total?
Yes.
Okay. Now, could I refer you back to your rebuttal testimony?
Okay.
And in particular on page 12.
Thank you for citing the pages. It's made it so much easier. Okay.
On lines 4 through 9, you describe how Northwestern agreed with and made the adjustments proposed by Mr. Higgins. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you know if those corrections are included in the settlement?
I do not. They are. Oh, excuse me. Let me clarify. I know they were included in rebuttal. I couldn't say specifically how that was in settlement.
All right. So in its initial revenue requirement filing, Northwestern had proposed some adjustments to the 2021 test year due to an unusually high number of open positions. Is that correct?
Yes,
So Northwestern's adjustment, just to be clear, was an increase to the revenue requirement initially proposed.
correct.
All right. So the initial filing already attempted to normalize for the abnormal condition in year 2021.
Correct.
All right. Could you now refer to MCC witness Smith's testimony? All right. And we'll start at page 52.
Okay.
At the bottom of page 52, starting on line 25, we see an answer to a question that carries over onto page 53. Do you see that answer?
Just reading through it real quick.
Yeah.
Let me just read it one more time.
Yep.
Okay,
And so would you agree with me that Mr. Smith has proposed labor adjustments related to open positions of $1,088,000 and $688,000 for electric and natural gas respectively?
yes,
Okay. So both the MCC and LCG's proposed adjustments were adjustments to the initial revenue requirement requested by Northwestern, right?
correct.
All right. Could then I refer you to page 5 of your own rebuttal testimony?
Okay,
So on page 5, I believe that you stated that you are generally in agreement with MCC's proposed adjustment and the methodology regarding those open positions. Do you recall that testimony?
yes. Mhm.
You also stated that Northwestern had updated its information used by Mr. Smith, the witness from MCC, in his calculation for using actual 2022 open positions, correct?
Correct.
All right. So you state that the total open position updated adjustments should be $737,000 for electric and gas together. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
And that's on lines 7, 8, 9 of your testimony, that figure, a full sentence.
Correct.
Okay. So as stated earlier on page 12 of your rebuttal testimony, you made the corrections that were identified by LCG. And those totaled, I believe we established, for both electric and natural gas, around $855,000, correct?
Excuse me, the amounts that you're mentioning, are those the ones that we identified or the ones that they had identified? I apologize. I'm not remembering these amounts.
No, that's a fair question. I believe they were the amounts that LCG had identified, but Northwestern had agreed with.
Right. Okay. There were several corrections that were made to the labor adjustments. And so for those specific ones, I don't have those numbers, but subject to check.
Okay. So if you made the corrections that LCG had identified, and then the open position adjustment that MCC had identified, those two adjustments in total should reduce the overall initial revenue requirement by $1.5 million, subject to check.
Mhm.
Okay. But as we addressed earlier, in your rebuttal exhibits 3 and 4, Northwestern has actually proposed to increase annual labor corrections and open position updates by $136,000 and $87,000 for electric and gas respectively, correct?
Correct. Mhm.
So these total at the end, approximately $220,000 worth of upward adjustments in the revenue requirement.
That's correct.
So how did we get from accepting approximately $1.5 million in downward adjustment to making a $220,000 upward adjustment.
I'm looking for it in my testimony, but there was another correction that was identified through the data request process where we had an incorrect allocation or increase, I should say, for non-union. That was corrected and that increased from approximately 2 to 4%. And that was more than the other corrections. So that's what caused the increase.
I'll give you a moment here just to page through that.
Okay, please see page 22 of my rebuttal testimony, rows 8 through 12.
Was 8 through 12. Do you mean lines 8 through 12 for that?
Yes.
Okay.
lines.
So that describes the response to LCG 066C and an upward adjustment to normalize. And could you describe for me what, again, that adjustment was for?
We had applied an incorrect increase for the non-union labor. We had only used 2.23% and it should have been 4.09%. So we corrected that as well, which increased the labor adjustment.
Okay, this may be a difficult question for you to answer, but for the sake of our regulatory folks, do you know where in either of your exhibits for either electric or natural gas that particular adjustment would be reflected?
That would be a bit difficult because it is a huge exhibit. And subject to check in my files, I have them highlighted and I know which columns. I don't know that I'll see that here, but I can look.
I don't know that we need to spend time paging through 127 pages. We'll endeavor to find it. I sincerely appreciate your navigating through all these different exhibits with me. Mr. President, that concludes my questions for Ms. Rich.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Uda Recross.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Renewable Northwest. Okay, so for those that did not do cross, that was some weighty questioning. I'd like to open up the opportunity for any party to do a cross at this point in time. All right, seeing no takers. Ms. Hill, redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Rich, is the Byron pipeline a natural gas asset or an electric? A natural gas asset or an electric asset, if you know?
I believe that's an electric asset.
Okay, thank you.
I could be wrong on that.
I have no further questions.
Can I correct that?
Yeah.
I do know better. It is a gas asset.
Okay. So regardless, the point I'm trying to make, if it's a gas asset, would the rates be reflected in the gas revenue requirement?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And no further questions.
Okay, what would you like to do with this witness?
I'd like to permanently excuse her.
All right, any objection to permanently excusing Ms. Rich? Seeing no objection, Ms. Rich, you are permanently excused. Thank you for your testimony this morning. Enjoy. We do have one accommodation request, Captain.
Thank you, Mr. President. The parties have stipulated that the direct testimony and exhibits of Brian C. Collins, identified as FEA Exhibit 2, be admitted into the record. That's also been provided to the court reporter. And then also the parties have stipulated that FEA cross-intervenor response testimony of Brian C. Collins, identified as FEA Exhibit 5, be admitted into the record, and that Mr. Brian Collins be permanently excused.
All right, Captain, just let me make sure. So it's FEA 2 and FEA 5?
That is correct.
Okay. Any objection to the stipulated entry of FEA 2 and FEA 5? Seeing no objection, those are admitted into the record. And then I think you said that there was a stipulation to permanently excusing this witness.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any objection to permanently excusing Mr. Collins? All right, seeing none, Mr. Collins is permanently excused. Thank you. Why don't you call your next witness and then we'll get the testimony in the record, and then I think we'll take a break at that point in time.
Mr. Chairman, Northwestern calls Ms. Bobby Schroppel, and it will be appearing on Zoom.
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Ms. Schroppel. Thank you. Have you been sworn?
I have not.
Okay, can you raise your right hand? Oh, there you are.
Yep,
See you. All right. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, your witness.
Ms. Schroppel, please state your name and spell your last name for the
It's
record.
Bobby Schroppel. Last name is SCHROEP, P as in Paul, EL.
What is your business address?
3010 West 69th Street, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, 57108.
By whom are you employed?
Northwestern Energy,
What is your title?
Vice President, Customer Care, Communications, and Human Resources.
Did you submit pre-filed testimony in this docket?
I did.
Do you have the testimony before you?
I do.
Is that testimony identified as the pre-filed direct testimony of Bobby L. Schroppel?
It is.
Do you have any corrections to your testimony?
I do not.
Mr. Chairman, I move to admit Ms. Schroppel's pre-filed direct testimony as Northwestern Exhibit number 21.
All right, is there any objection to the admission of Northwest Energy number 21? Seeing none, no objection, Northwest Energy 21 is admitted into the record.
I tender this witness for cross-examination.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schroppel, we're going to take a few minute break here. If you just hold with us, please. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, parties and everyone, why don't we we'll take an 11-minute break. We'll go off the record now, but return at 10:15 a.m. and resume cross-examination of Ms. Schroppel. And at 4 a.m., we are off the record.
Yeah, I have my. Well, mine's white. That was
Okay, time is now 10:15 a.m. We will go back on the record. One scheduling matter. Commissioner Fielder has asked that witness Carmody, is that how you pronounce his last name? Be recalled for questioning. We will slot him at 3:00 p.m. sharp. Mr. Carmody at 3:00 sharp. All right. Ms. Schroppel, you still with us?
I am.
Okay. We will now move to cross-examination. Mr. Brown?
No questions.
Mr. Nelson? Captain Duffy? Mr. Nell? Mr. Nell? Okay, so I understand from our IT person that Ms. Trinnell has indicated that she's in an area where she might not be able to speak at this point in time, so we'll just hold her open for now. HRC?
Yes, Mr. President, a few questions.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Rivas.
Hello, Ms. Schroppel. Good afternoon.
Good morning.
This is Diego Rivas representing HRC 11 NRDC and Northwest Energy Coalition. Ms. Schroppel, just to confirm, you're the Vice President of Customer Care, is that right?
That is correct.
You state in your direct testimony on page 4 that energy efficiency programs and demand side management generally are customer care functions. Is that right?
That was correct at the time. And customer care is heavily involved in working with customers and, across a number of programs. Recently, though, the actual energy efficiency function has moved to Cindy Fang.
Right. You recognize what I was getting at. Thank you for that. So how long before it moved over to Cindy Fang in regulatory, how long was DSM in your division of customer care?
Oh, I'm just going to take a guess because I don't have the exact date in front of me that it moved over, but it moved over to customer care when Pat Corcoran, who was our former vice president of regulatory affairs, who had it reporting to him for many, many years. So I want to say maybe it reported to customer care for 4 or 5 years.
Okay, but before that, as you indicated, it was in regulatory as well, correct?
Yeah, for as long as I have ever been at Northwestern, it was under regulatory affairs.
And so is there any reason, can you explain why the DSM program has shifted back and forth between regulatory and customer care?
Yeah, I'll give you some insight into that. When Pat Corcoran retired, we took a little bit of a hiatus and we didn't have a vice president of regulatory affairs at the time. That function was slid under former chief legal officer Heather Graham. We then made a strategic decision to split them back out with the hiring of Shannon Heim and Cindy Fang. And given Cindy's extensive background with rate design and energy efficiency programs in California in particular, it seemed to make sense that that function go back to regulatory affairs.
Thank you. You talked in your direct testimony about the impact of the pandemic on customer care. Did you not?
I did.
And you would generally agree that this was a particularly hard time for customers, at least certain customers?
I would agree. I think it was a hard time for just about everybody in the entire country and world.
And those were the years of 2020, 2021, maybe into the beginning of 2022?
I think that's about right. Certainly 2021, things started to loosen up and I feel like they were returning to normal as we moved into 2022.
Great, thank you. Before I get into the next line of questions, I just want to establish a couple of quick things. I think you should be able to answer, but feel free to defer. Just very general questions. First, you would agree that Northwestern's total residential customer number has increased over the last 10 years. Would you agree?
I would agree.
And generally speaking, over those last 10 years, Northwestern's rates have also gone up for residential customers.
In real terms, they have gone up. I'm not sure that's accurate if you would look at inflation.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask you some questions specifically about low income customers. Would you agree with me that low income and fixed income customers are hardest hit by any increase in utility rates?
I would agree that low income customers are generally hardest hit, and that I would agree with you if the fixed income customer is also a low income customer. But I also feel that the majority of us in the United States at some form or another live on a fixed income.
Okay, and so it would follow then that the larger or more substantial the increase, the harder the hit to low income customers, correct?
I think that's a fair statement, depending on their living situation, and what type of housing they're living in and the impacts that weather, et cetera, would have on them. I mean, there are low income customers who live in housing situations where their bills are really very static regardless.
Okay, thank you. On page 9 of your direct testimony, you state that the goal of your outreach efforts in reaching out to customers with past due accounts is to help them avoid accruing unmanageable account balances. Do I have that right?
You do.
And when a customer fails to pay their bills after going through the process that you talk about, their total, if it remains unpaid, it goes into an account called arrearages, does it not?
It does.
And is it true that arrearages are then paid for by other customers in rates?
That's generally true to the extent that whatever's in rates matches up with what we are carrying on our balance sheet in terms of unpaid bills.
And so it would follow then that helping low income customers make their payments benefits all other customers as well by avoiding having to pay for those arrearages.
I think that's fair statement, yes.
Okay, you state on page 14 of your testimony that you staff open houses with human resource development councils, and customers can get information of weatherization and your low income programs, correct?
We have done that, yes. We have partnered up and had some open houses over the past few years.
And do you do that at all the development councils or just a few?
Just a few. The most recent example was in Butte, and we had an open house. And I have that written down. It's in, I have it written here. It was the Department of Health and Human Services, Energy Share and Action, Inc., I believe, were participated in that. And we actually even invited a reporter from the lead newspapers in, and we got a pretty nice story out of it as a result.
Okay, and so the part of the reason why you would do such a thing for weatherization is that's one of the many ways that utility can keep low income customers' bills manageable. Is that right?
I agree with that, especially for low income customers who are living in housing stock that maybe needs deeper weatherization, which of course is not all low income customers.
Okay. Ms. Schroppel, are you aware that there exists a roughly 8-year backlog of customers attempting to get weatherization services just from HRC 11 in Missoula?
I couldn't speak to the actual 8-year number that you just spoke to, but I was aware of that from the time period that Danny Williams reported to me, and we had talked about that.
Okay, and are you aware that weatherization contractors like the Human Resource Councils are having difficulty servicing low-income customers with weatherization dollars because of the way Northwestern administers those low-income weatherization dollars?
I can't speak to that. That would be Danny Williams' area.
Okay. And did you happen to read the testimony of Mr. Botts in this case?
In full disclosure, I read parts of it. And I skimmed parts of it.
Okay. So you would agree then that Northwestern has made no proposal to change the way it handles low income weatherization dollars. Is that right?
Not at this point. We have not made any proposals to change the way we handle low income weatherization dollars, to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Schroppel. Just a couple more questions here. Can you turn to page 14 of your testimony?
Yes, I can. I am.
Okay, when you read the two sentences starting at the end of line 3, the next two sentences, they start with the words while on average.
Yes, while on average, 3 to 5% of our customers are enrolled in the low income discount program, we know there are many who qualify who are not enrolled. And you want me to read the next sentence?
Yes, please.
To this end, we continually work to increase customer awareness of and participation in the discount program.
Thank you. Can you turn now to data response HRC 25?
Yes, I have that in front of me.
Okay, this is a table showing the number of customers enrolled in Northwestern's bill discount program. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, for Montana.
Correct, in Montana. And it's correct that the middle 3 columns are the new enrollees in the program.
I'm sorry, you said HRC 25?
Correct.
Well, it shows electric discount only, natural discount only, both, and then the total, and then it's a by year from 2012.
By year, correct. So
Yeah.
by year, those would be new enrollees.
Well, okay, they would be enrollees. Certainly there are, if you're using the word new to mean that they re-enrolled, that I would agree with you. I would suspect there's a lot of consistent enrollees as well, year over year.
And the far right column is the total for electric and natural gas discount for the years 2012 through 2021.
Correct.
And the general trend for all of those columns is that those numbers are going down. Isn't that right?
That is correct based on this data.
Okay, so the number of new enrollees and the total number has decreased year over year.
Yes.
And in fact, the number of new and total enrollees in the bill discount program has actually dropped by 1/3 in the last 10 years. Is that about right?
Well, actually, I want to just clarify something. While I agree with you that the overall trend is, from a little under 20,000 to a little under 14,000 over the last 10 years, there are years within there where it's not accurate to say that the numbers decreased from one year to the next. There are some years where they actually increased.
Okay. So would you agree that the work to continually increase customer awareness and participation in the discount program that you read from your testimony has not been particularly effective?
I would not. Well, that is a really interesting conversation that we've been having at the national level. Engagement levels in low-income programs, and particularly if you look at energy programs, are lower than what you see in general with SNAP or free and reduced lunches. And as an industry, we're trying to figure out what more we can do to get customers to engage in these programs. But this is not unique to Northwestern by a long shot. And in fact, compared to some states that I've looked at, our engagement levels are actually pretty respectable.
And yet Northwestern doesn't have any proposals in this case or otherwise to change how it's going to reach out to low-income customers. Is that right?
Well, let me clarify. I understand your question. We're not proposing any changes to the low-income discount program at this point in time. If you are talking about the efforts that we undertake to reach out and try to, engage with customers and make them aware of and assist them in going through the application process, that's a large priority for us. And it's something that we engage in on an ongoing basis. And in fact, in this last year, I would say we made a concerted effort to really ramp up and even do more than we had been doing in previous years, knowing that this rate review was underway and that inflation is taking a toll on everybody, certainly low income at a higher percentage.
And do you have any details that you can share on how you're planning on doing that?
I'm glad you asked. Thank you. Of course, we use our walk-in offices, and we're one of the few utilities out there that still maintains walk-in offices, and they get a fair amount of traffic. So we have information there. We have trained personnel that will actually work with the customer on site to take them through the application process, make sure that they are aware of energy assistance programs, efficiency programs, payment assistant tools, weatherization. That's the same is true for our customer service representatives who talk to customers every single day via phone or over the email. More than half of the editions of our newsletter, which according to our market research continues to be very well read, contains and talks about information related to energy efficiency, bill management tools, free weatherization, energy assistance programs, Energy Share of Montana rebate programs, and then just general information on how you can manage winter bills. We specifically updated our website and have had over 36,000 visits to that portion of our website since we did that. We ran 3 specific advertising campaigns, one that focused on seniors, one that was a more broader audience, and then the third one, we focused back again on 65 plus and low income. Let's see, I talked about the forum that we had with the Department of Public Health and Human Services, Energy Share and Action, Inc. That resulted in the article in the Lee newspapers, and we did see an uptick on our website after that article came out. And then we continue to engage where we can at home shows and trade shows and things like that throughout the Montana service territory.
Great, thank you, Ms. Schrupp. And those are things, some of them you've identified in your direct testimony, but it remains the case that Northwestern has not made any proposals in this rate filing to change the way that it reaches out to low-income customers. Is that right?
We haven't made any proposals to change that, no.
Thank you, Ms. Schrupp. No more questions, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rivas. Mr. Uda?
No questions.
Renewable Northwest? MEIC? Mr. Allen? We'll try Ms. Trinnell one more time.
I'm not sure she's on. If she's on the Zoom, I don't see her name.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner questions, Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have some questions for Ms. Schroppel. Ms. Schroppel, this is Commissioner Fielder. On page 3 of your pre-filed direct testimony, you described the purpose of your testimony as addressing the role of customer care in the delivery of safe, reliable, and affordable energy services, correct?
That is correct.
Have you been observing the commission's public comment sections related to this hearing this past week?
I've only been able to observe a few of the sessions, so unfortunately not the majority of them, no.
Okay. Well, there have certainly been some comments in favor of the rate increase. There has also been multiple comments opposing the rate increase. And the primary reason seems to be, well, one of the primary reasons stated seem to be concerns over the ongoing affordability of energy services if the commission were to approve the settlement that Northwestern entered into with several of the interveners in this case. Have Northwestern's customer care representatives been hearing similar concerns from customers?
They probably do. I mean, we talk to, we take a million plus calls a year. They're not all from Montana. Some are South Dakota and Nebraska. And certainly, but this has been sort of a universal truth for as long as I've run customer care. One of the top reasons that people call in is to talk about their bill and to, maybe seek payment arrangements, which we try to be obviously very flexible with helping them any way we can that's within reason. To keep them from getting disconnected. We never want to do that. That's not our end goal.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a million plus calls a year coming in. Do you have a rough estimate of the volume of customer comments Northwestern has received regarding its rate request in this docket?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Are you familiar with the concept of energy burden as a measurement of affordability?
Yes, in general, I am. I'm not an expert in it, but I am aware of it and certainly it's talked about.
Okay. Would you accept that generally speaking, energy burden is expressed as the ratio of customer energy bills to income?
I think that's fair.
Does Northwestern take steps to measure or estimate the energy burden of its residential customers?
We have not done that, but we have talked about it, and it is something that is being talked about a lot more at the industry level.
Okay. Why hasn't Northwestern taken steps to address this energy burden question?
I don't have a good answer with just that at this point in time, we've spent the majority of our time trying to work with the customers who, can qualify for the energy assistance to get them the dollars that are out there. Interestingly enough, I was just asking for some data on this, but we've had a situation in the last year or so where the states that we serve have had more money than they have demand, and they've come back and given additional grants to existing customers. So we are now sitting in a position where 90% of our customers who are currently receiving low-income energy assistance are carrying an account balance, an account credit that's averaging $650.
So going back to measurement of the energy burden, an estimate of the energy burden, am I clear? Northwestern's not really taking steps to try to calculate or estimate the energy burden of its residential customers?
We're not, Vice President Fielder, but it's certainly something that we would be willing to talk to the commission about.
Short of having those types of measures or estimates of energy burden on its residential customers, does Northwestern Energy factor in the concept of energy burden and the impact that those energy burdens have on residential customers when Northwestern is budgeting or making investment decisions?
That question, I don't, but that question would be better, I think, addressed to somebody in the finance department. But in general, I do not believe that we are doing that. But we certainly talk about the energy burden to all customers on a regular basis literally in almost every financial and investment decision we make. We're extremely cognizant and aware of that balance between providing affordable and reliable energy services that are resilient and the impact on the individuals who pay the bills.
Okay. While Mr. Rivas was questioning you about impacts to low-income customers, I think you responded that you felt that the impact could possibly be felt the greatest in the low-income sector. How do you expect the settlement rates to impact the low-income sector of your customers?
I think it will vary depending on their living situation, and how large their bill is. Like I said, it varies substantially. If you're living in a relatively well-built apartment, frankly, the impact if you're electric only may be relatively small. If you're on the other end of the spectrum, where you have a living situation where your home is not energy efficient, you're probably it's going to impact you more, and you'll be more susceptible to the weather, like if the weather's extremely cold.
Okay. Has Northwestern developed any kind of standard to relate energy burden data to affordability at all, even conceptually?
Well, only what we talk about at sort of at the national level, and I hesitate to throw numbers out, but I think 6 to 7% or so, I believe, is some of the numbers that we talk about nationally when something, you know, the energy burden gets into the 6 to 7% range or higher.
Let's go to page 14 of your pre-filed direct testimony. I'm going to refer to that next.
Okay.
This is where you describe the electric and natural gas low income customer rate discounts, correct?
Yes.
Did Northwestern undertake an evaluation of the adequacy of the current low income customer rate discounts based on energy burden or other factors when developing its rate proposal in this case?
Not to my knowledge.
Were you involved in any of the discussions that resulted in the settlement in this case?
I was not.
Do you know whether the adequacy of the current low income customer rate discount was considered in the settlement discussions?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, and in your conversation with Mr. Rivas, he referred you to your statement that on average 3 to 5% of Northwestern's customers are enrolled in the low income discount program, but that there are many who qualify that are not enrolled. Do you recall that?
I do.
Okay, my question is the 3 to 5% figure specific to Northwestern's Montana service area?
Yes, I believe it is. And it's 3 to 5% of all customers. It's not 3 to 5% of what we believe would be the low income qualified customers.
Okay, so of all Montana customers?
Yes.
Does Northwestern offer low income customer rate discounts in its South Dakota and Nebraska territories?
We do not.
I think you covered some of this ground, but I'm going to give you another shot at it in case there's anything that we missed or I may have missed. You described the ongoing work to increase customer awareness of the low income customer rate discounts. Has that work been successful in your opinion? Are there any noticeable trends in enrollment?
I would say that while the overall enrollment numbers for the past 2 to 3 years have been relatively static, I think it's fair to say that we saw some notable upticks for short bursts of time, like when, you know, the article came out in the lead papers after we held that forum. We saw, you know, we saw a little bit of an uptick, I think, of applicants or approved applicants coming through for us to enroll in the discount, the bill discount program. We've certainly seen upticks as we've done different things on our website traffic. But yet the overall numbers, as far as customers, you know, enrolling for, applying for energy assistance do tend to be relatively static.
And you mentioned also that one of the ways that customers learn about these programs is through your walk-in offices.
Yes.
Is the number of people that walk in to learn about these programs, is it significant compared to the other ways that you're able to reach prospective applicants for this program?
You know, I don't have that data in front of me. But you know, I let me just word it this way. I think our employees are trained and we work on an ongoing basis with them that anytime, no matter what channel they're engaging with the customer in, if they believe that that customer, you know, I mean, they will bring up energy assistance and offer to help them through the process if the customer, you know, is inclined to want to go that route. So it's an ongoing part of the conversation with particularly any customer who's, you know, showing signs of struggling to pay their bill.
Okay, but some of those encounters happen at the walk-in offices.
Oh, certainly. And it's what's nice about the walk-in office experience is we can sit down at a desk It's private. We can print off their energy, the information that we know they're going to need in order to apply. We can give that to them on the spot.
That sounds very nice. There's really no substitute for that in-person
I
encounter.
agree. And particularly when something's a little more complicated or a little just, somebody's really kind of emotional or struggling, that walk-in environment can really be a game changer.
So these walk-in offices were closed for a significant period of time during the COVID pandemic. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were closed for, and again, I should know this. I'm sorry, I don't. They were closed, probably for the majority of 2021. We did reopen them quite some time ago, and it was something we talked about almost every single day because we really wanted to get them back open, and we finally just made the decision to do that. And frankly, it's gone extremely well. We haven't really had any issues, and the customers started to come back fairly quickly.
Did you notice any trends in the impact on the number of people that were successfully applying for learning about the low-income program during the pandemic when the offices were closed as opposed to after the offices reopened?
It's a good question. I don't know that I could answer that without just speculating. I will tell you the one thing that was interesting that we learned and the entire industry learned when the disconnection process was suspended for a number of months. We saw a big drop off in customers wanting to get in a payment arrangement or talk about enrolling in energy assistance. It wasn't until those processes restarted that people started to come back around and want to work with us.
Okay, that's interesting. I think one more question, and that is, are you aware of any recent trends over the past several years in the level of uncollectible bill amounts? I think you touched on this a little bit, but can you recap that or summarize it for me?
For Northwestern specifically?
Correct.
Yeah, actually, our customers have continued to do a phenomenal job paying their bills. We have had very static, consistent uncollectibles. I've been expecting them to ramp up a little bit with the cold winter that we had and some of the increases in natural gas prices. And honestly, at this point, it's not happening. We're not seeing it. I will tell you that in other parts of the country, though, where they have different regulatory processes and rules that they follow, and in areas of the country where they still aren't disconnecting customers for non-pay, some of those utilities are carrying it almost more on their balance sheet than the entire value of Northwestern in terms of bad debt.
Has the information regarding uncollectible bill amounts been provided somewhere in the record of this case? Do you know?
I would assume so. I think that would be, a question for somebody like Crystal or maybe Cindy Fang or.
Okay. Are you finished answering that question?
I am, sorry.
All
Yes.
right. Thank you. I appreciate that, Ms. Schruppel. And Mr. President, that's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Vice President Fielder. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just one question that had to do with incentives. How is your department affected by incentives? Do you have particular incentive? How is that measured?
You mean the employees?
And yourself?
Yeah, we would participate depending on whether you're in a union role or a non-union role. We participate in the company's broad-based incentive plan, like everybody else does.
What your department? What is the metric for the incentive bonuses that you might receive?
It's the same metrics that are in the broad-based plan. So it's part financial performance, part reliability, part safety, and part customer satisfaction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Panochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. So in the past, we've seen low-income assistance, but there's been an added assistance program where people have been getting assistance that aren't your normal low-income family. And the money doesn't go to the landlord or directly to the person. The assistance program has to pay the energy company directly for electric and gas and water and sewer. This is the highest level I've ever seen, probably due to COVID. That assistance program is still available, and people are still using it, but it's supposed to come to an end pretty soon. So we must have seen a record amount of assistance money coming in than ever before in the history of Northwestern Energy. Does that sound fair?
I think that it is absolutely fair to say that starting with the COVID era, at the federal level, there has been unprecedented amounts of assistance available, be it for renters to pay your rent, to pay your mortgage, energy assistance. And like I had commented earlier, while we're not seeing a massive uptick in the number of people that are applying for and going on energy assistance, they are those that are on energy assistance. I think it's fair to say that in the last 12, 18 months, give or take, that they have been receiving more money per account, which is why for the first time that I've been around, we have so many low-income qualified accounts that are actually carrying some pretty large credit balances. And that was not the intent prior. The intent was, if the customer, in fact, if the customer had money on their account at a certain time of the year, we had to send it back, is my understanding, to the states. That is not happening right now, is my understanding. And it's not just in Montana, it's not happening in South Dakota either. They're letting the customers keep that money.
Here's a question. With all this money available, and maybe it hasn't been 4 years ago, but I think in the last 2 years, it seems like anyone who needed money, and I mean anyone, that could make the case, their energy bill was covered. So does this mean that Northwestern actually might have had a better record of getting money collected because of all this assistance that was available to everybody? Or do you feel that Northwestern is still behind on collecting money?
I would say that we are pretty consistent with prior years. We have, I think that what you're talking about has certainly helped. And we haven't seen some of the big upticks in unpaid, like the total dollar amounts that we carry for bad debt. We have not seen that like some of our other utilities have, with the exception of that time period I talked about where we didn't disconnect. And despite making 30,000 plus outbound calls and sending postcards, we really couldn't get much customer engagement until we started to send disconnect notices again. So we had an uptick at that point, but that has been worked through and had returned to normal. I think, even prior to us filing this rate review.
So an answer might be like this: we're no better off or no worse off than we normally are.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
I think that's a fair comment. Yeah, despite some ups and downs, that are based on specific time periods and specific things that may or may not be going on, I'd say over the last few years, we're no better off or no worse off. That's how I feel anyway.
Okay, that's a good answer to get out of the way. So the federal government not only had assistance for the ratepayers, low income and people who weren't low income, but they had assistance for the energy companies like Northwest Energy. Is that correct?
Well, I don't want to misspeak. So I'm not aware of Northwestern getting any money that didn't come to us, with the exception of there's the IIJA stuff that's going on right now, but that is still unfolding. And I don't think anybody's been granted any funds at this point for projects. I don't recall us getting any funds from the federal government that didn't come down through the low income energy assistance program directly onto the customer's account.
I heard that some energy companies did out of state, and I was wondering if Northwestern was treated fairly. But perhaps Northwestern didn't ask for it. That's something I'm trying to learn more about. But I wanted to get this question out there. Do you feel, and you may not be the right person to ask, that Northwestern may have not gotten money that other companies in other states did? And then I want to know how we could improve that to make sure our energy companies in Montana are treated as fairly as those that are out of state. To your knowledge, you don't have any knowledge of that.
Well, I have a little bit of information that I can share, and it is different states do things differently, and they do have some discretion with how they, can use some of this federal money and whether they give it, how they give it out. But I got curious about that question recently, and so I went out and I used publicly available information. So I can't say it's 100% scientific, but it was information from the government websites and whatnot, and did some estimating based on other information that I could find. And I looked at just a group of our peer utilities. So I looked at the names you would expect me to look at, right? Avista, Idaho Power, MDU, but I looked at some utilities in New York and Arizona and California, and actually Northwestern in all three of our states, on a per capita, per what I estimate to be qualified household level, we actually do extremely well, much, much better than what you see in places like Arizona. And I think part of it is because of the winter heating season. And so states that are more northern tend to get more money per household. I also think that it is a function of the fact that while our engagement levels are not as high as some people might want them to be, or as we would even want them to be, they are higher than you see in some other states. So then as you increase the number of customers on low income energy assistance, I am operating under the assumption that you kind of grow what the federal government gives you year over year.
Well, let's say an energy company who needs more money and they're looking at filing a rate case might have gotten millions and millions of dollars from the federal government where Northwest Energy didn't. And if we got that money, it could cause this rate case to be less because the government handed out some company in Arizona $100 million and Northwest Energy didn't ask. They're hardworking and they didn't get that money. My ratepayer may say, wait a minute, now if there's federal money to be handed out, did Northwest Energy get their fair share? And if they did, would that cause this rate case to be less? Is that a question I take up with, say, our Congressman Rosendale, maybe Congressman Zinke, or one of the two senators, Tester or Daines? What are your thoughts there, just in case that has to be asked?
Yeah, well, my thoughts are that I'm not the person to answer the question, but I certainly, talking to your elected representatives is certainly probably, not a bad idea.
All right. You work in several states. Do you see anything Montana law wise that we could do to make us better than another state? Or do you feel that Montana is treating assistance better than other states?
I think Montana does well. We have small differences between the way that, the states operated in, as far as Nebraska versus South Dakota versus Montana. But I actually feel that our customers in Montana are fairly well off. I mean, we have not only, does the state, do a good job, I think, of administering the low income energy assistance programs, but then there's the weatherization programs, and then there's the bill discount. And frankly, we don't have either of those programs for our customers in South Dakota or Nebraska. So I think Montana customers are in a pretty good spot.
If you see any improvements that we need to be done, sure, let me know.
You bet.
No more questions, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinochi. Commissioner Bukacek.
Yes, I have just wanted to talk about energy burden a little bit and affordability and bring it to figures that relate to daily life examples of real people. And I'm going to try to make this really brief. I was in my questions for Mr. John Hines on Friday, we looked at MCC 6, which is a table that's well known, subject to check. But what we came what it looks like based on that table and then extrapolating to the average family household, the increase that's being proposed in the settlement is an increase of $25 to $30 per month and an increase total per month of $116 to $130. Now, I know people that would be difficult to pay an extra $30 a month. I get that. Those are people typically that are in really dire straits. And my question for you is, if somebody can't afford an additional $25 to $30, is it safe to say that they would be covered by various programs for assistance with their energy bill?
I think that if the customer is willing to engage with us and let us help them, I think that is a fair statement. I think between the federal money and the bill discount program, et cetera, I do think that there's a lot of assistance out there to help people that are in that situation. And if they aren't in a situation where they qualify from an income perspective, then there are programs that I think still can be tapped into. And then, you end up in a situation then where we just work with them on payment arrangements and try to get to a point where they can, make their budget work.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Bukacek. I have no questions for this witness, Mr. Hamilton.
No questions.
Okay. Diego, did you have pre-cross?
Just one, Mr. President. Mr. Oppel, do you recall a conversation you had with some commissioners about the bill discount program?
I do.
Okay. Isn't it true that the mom and pop store that would be part of the GS1 secondary class, which would see a substantial rate increase via this settlement, is not eligible for a bill discount?
That is currently true. It is, you have to be a residential customer.
Thank you. No more questions, Mr. President.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Rivas. Reed, direct.
No questions.
Okay. What would you like to do with this witness?
I'd like to permanently excuse this witness.
Okay. Is there any objection to permanently excusing Ms. Schroppel? Seeing none, Ms. Schroppel, you are permanently excused. Thank you for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
All right. Would Northwestern like to call its next witness?
We would, Mr. President, just one follow-up though, to Commissioner Fielder's question about bad debt information. And that is in the filing and it's in statement G, worksheets or work papers, and it's a 5-year average. So if there's questions about that, Ms. Rich could speak to it. So just for awareness. Northwestern would call Jennifer Nelson and she is appearing by Zoom.
Hello, Ms. Nelson.
Good morning.
Can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Have you been sworn?
Great. No, I have not.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, your witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Getting our ducks in a row. Good morning, Ms. Nelson.
Good morning.
Can you please state your name and spell the last for the record?
My name is Jennifer E. Nelson, and the last name is spelled as N as in Nancy, E-L-S-O-N.
Great. And by whom are you employed?
I am employed by Concentric Energy Advisors.
And who are you appearing for today?
I'm appearing on behalf of Northwestern Energy.
Super. Do you have in front of you your direct pre-filed testimony?
Yes, I do.
And I believe that testimony has been marked as Northwestern 42.
Yes.
And is that a true and accurate copy of your testimony?
Yes, it is.
And if I asked you those questions under oath today, would you give the same answer?
Yes, I would.
Do you have any corrections to your testimony?
I do have 2 small corrections. During my preparation for this hearing, I became aware that the commission had approved a gas infrastructure replacement clause for Energy West Montana and Cut Bank Gas in docket number 2017.9.80 order number 7575C. And so I would like to make a correction on page JEN 36 of my direct testimony, which is showing figure 11. On that figure, I have listed under the row capital cost tracking mechanism, the commission's practice is none. And at the time I developed this figure, that was my understanding. And so I would change that to note the commission's approval of the gas infrastructure replacement clause for Energy West Montana and Cut Bank Gas. Similarly, I would make a change to my exhibit JEN2 on page 1. Under the third column that's titled capital investment, under the row for Montana, which is the last, I believe the last row of page 1, at least how it's printed for me. And I would note a G in the column where it's currently blank. And those would be my only corrections.
Okay, super. At this time, Northwestern would move the admission of Northwestern Energy 42 as amended.
Is there any objection to Northwest Energy 42 as amended? Seeing none, Northwest Energy 42 as amended is admitted.
Super. Also in front of you, Ms. Nelson, should be what has been marked Northwestern 43, which I believe is your pre-filed rebuttal testimony.
Yes, I have that.
Okay, super. And is it a true and accurate copy of your rebuttal testimony?
Yes, it is.
And if I asked you those questions today under oath, would your answer be the same?
Yes, they would.
And do you have any corrections to Northwestern 43?
I do not have any corrections.
At this time, Northwestern would move exhibit 43, Northwestern Energy 43 into the record.
Is there any objection to admission of Northwest Energy 43? Being none, Northwest Energy 43 is admitted.
At this time, Northwestern would tender this witness for cross-examination.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown?
No questions.
Mr. Nelson? Captain Duffy? Is Ms. Trinnell on? Ms. Trinnell is not online, so we'll move on. Mr. Rivas? Mr. Ruda?
No questions.
Noble Northwest? MEIC? Thank you, Mr. Helly. Commissioner questions, Vice President Fielder?
No questions.
Commissioner O'Donnell? Commissioner Pinochi?
No questions.
Commissioner Bukacek?
No questions, Mr. President.
I don't have any questions for this witness. Mr. Hamilton?
No questions.
Okay, easy peasy. Redirect?
No, thank you, Mr. President.
What would you like to do with this witness?
Northwestern would like to permanently excuse this witness.
All right, is there any objection to permanently excusing Ms. Nelson? Seeing none, Ms. Nelson, you are permanently excused. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, Ms. Heim, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Northwestern would call its next witness and recall Cynthia Fang.
And as Ms. Fang is making her way back up, how many witnesses does Northwestern Energy have?
Ms. Fang and Mr. Carmody at 3 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back, Ms. Fang. Just remind you, you're still under oath.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Fang, for the record, would you please state your name and spelling your last name with your business address, please?
Cynthia S. Fang, last name Fang. Business address is 208 North Montana Avenue, Helena, Montana, 59601.
And I believe we established this last week, but just for the record, for clarity, in case we didn't, by whom are you employed?
Northwestern Energy,
And your title at Northwestern Energy?
Vice President, Regulatory Affairs.
Ms. Fang, did you submit pre-filed direct testimony on priority regulatory mechanisms in this docket?
I did.
Do you have that testimony in front of you?
I do.
And is it marked Exhibit NWE 44?
Yes.
Is that document NWE 44 a true and correct copy of your pre-filed direct testimony on that issue?
Yes.
And if I were to ask you today under oath, the questions that are set forth in that exhibit, would your answers be the same except for any changes or corrections or modifications?
Yes, and I do have some changes.
Okay, if you could please describe the changes to your pre-filed direct on that issue.
My pre-filed direct on that, needs to reflect the title change. VP of Regulatory.
Any other corrections?
Not that I'm aware of.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I would move for the admission of Exhibit NWE 44 as amended.
Any objection to Northwest Energy number 44 as amended? Seeing no objection, Northwest Energy 44 as amended is admitted.
Ms. Fang, did you also submit pre-filed direct testimony on allocated cost of service and rate design in this docket?
I did.
And do you have before you a document that has been marked as Exhibit NWE 45?
I do.
And is that exhibit as marked your testimony on the cost allocation and rate design issues?
Say that again?
Is that testimony or that document that's marked Exhibit NWE 45, is it your testimony on the cost allocation and rate design issue?
Yes,
And is that a true and correct copy of your pre-filed direct testimony on that issue?
it is.
And if I were to ask you under oath today the same questions that are set forth in that exhibit, would your answers be the same except for any corrections or modifications?
They would with similar change, just a change to titles since that time.
Thank you for that. With that, Mr. Chairman, I move for the admission of Exhibit NWE 45.
All right. Is there any objection to the admission of NWE 45 as amended? Seeing no objection, NW 45 as amended is admitted. Thank you.
Ms. Fang, did you submit pre-filed rebuttal testimony on priority regulatory mechanisms in this docket?
I did.
And do you have before you a document that is marked Exhibit NWE 46?
I do.
And is that your pre-filed rebuttal testimony on priority regulatory mechanisms?
It is.
And is Exhibit NWE 46 a true and correct copy of that rebuttal testimony?
It is subject to a couple of corrections.
Okay, and if I were to ask you the same questions under oath, would your answers be the same with the exception of those corrections?
It would.
And can you please identify the corrections?
Yes. So as noted in my response to data request MEIC 118, I have two changes to make to this rebuttal testimony. On page 15, line 23, the word costs should be inserted between and associated. And then in the same paragraph, continuing on to page 16, line 1, strike over the first 12 months and replace it with since the implementation.
And do you have any other corrections that you need to make to this testimony?
The comparable changes should also be made to Exhibit CSF 1.8 with the new language to be found at the bottom of page 1 and top of page 2 of that exhibit.
Thank you, Ms. Fang. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would move for the admission of Exhibit NWE 46 as amended.
Any objection to the admission of NWE 46 as amended? Seeing none, NW 46 as amended is admitted.
And finally, Ms. Fang, did you submit pre-filed rebuttal testimony on allocated cost of service and rate design?
I did.
And do you have a document in front of you that is marked Exhibit NWE 47?
Yes.
Is that document that is marked Exhibit NWE 47 a true and correct copy of your pre-filed rebuttal testimony in this docket on that particular issue?
It is.
If I were to ask you today under oath the same questions that are set forth in that exhibit, would your answers be the same except for any corrections or modifications?
They would.
Do you have any corrections or modifications to this testimony?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would move for the admission of Exhibit NWE 47.
Any objection to the admission of the NWE 47? Seeing none, NWE 47 is admitted.
And thank you. With that, I would tender Ms. Fang for cross-examination and questioning by the commission.
Okay. Mr. Brown.
No questions.
Mr. Nelson. Captain Duffy. Is Ms. Trinnell on? She is not on. Mr. Reed, HRC.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a couple of questions, Ms. Fang. Good morning. I think we can do this without resorting to your testimony, because I think you're going to know the answers to these questions, but if need to, we can take a look. So Northwestern filed or proposed a change to its PCAM in this docket. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And in your initial filing, you obviously proposed a change to the PCAM base rate. Is that correct? Can I restate it? Make it a little bit easier. In your initial filing, Northwestern proposed to reset the PCAM base rates based on power costs that you had accrued and power costs that you are estimating you will incur over the next period. Is that correct?
Yes, our rate review filing did include an update for the PCAM base. Sponsored, the details were provided by Joe Steinmetz.
Thank you. And you also proposed, in connection with the modifications to the PCAM, various other kind of methodological adjustments. For example, Northwestern proposed to reset the PCAM base rate annually. Is that correct?
Correct.
You also proposed to calculate deferrals on a monthly basis. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you also proposed to apply interest carrying charge to those monthly deferrals.
Correct.
And you also proposed with respect to capacity costs that they not be subject to the 90-10 sharing mechanism.
Correct.
And you filed a proposed tariff that reflected all of these proposed changes in your initial testimony, not your initial testimony, in Northwestern's initial testimony.
Correct.
Now, in your rebuttal testimony, Northwestern removed its request for annual adjustments to the PCAM base rate. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Now we come to the settlement. And in the settlement, and please correct me if if I'm not understanding correctly, but I think we went over this, or it was went over on your direct exam earlier. In the settlement, Northwestern has proposed only one kind of what I will refer to as a methodological adjustment in the PCAM. And that is, instead of making an adjustment monthly, you're now proposing to make an adjustment on a quarterly basis, and you will apply interest to that adjustment. In other words, that's the only change in the methodology that Northwestern is proposing. The 90-10 sharing with respect to capacity costs, you are no longer proposing that. You're obviously no longer proposing to reset the PCAM base annually. You as we just established, you removed that request in your rebuttal testimony. So the only change right now to the PCAM in terms of how you're calculating the PCAM and how you're will be applying the PCAM going forward is to make adjustments on a quarterly basis and apply interest to them. Is that all a fair characterization?
That is a fair characterization. So as part of the settlement, Northwestern is no longer moving forward with the request for capacity costs outside of the 90-10 sharing. And that is correct that we removed our proposal to update the base annually was part of our rebuttal.
And now the settlement is proposing to make the adjustment on a quarterly basis and apply interest.
Rather than monthly as initially proposed.
And
Correct.
I shouldn't have asked whether, I apologize, I cut you off. Did you finish?
No, we're good.
Okay. So I shouldn't have asked whether or not it was a fair characterization. I should have asked whether it's an accurate characterization. You would agree that was an accurate characterization.
I would agree.
So my question in the end is, did Northwestern file a revised PCAM tariff reflecting these changes?
If the question is, did we file a revised tariff to reflect the settlement changes? We have not.
And why is that?
To be perfectly honest, I just don't think we've gotten to it yet.
Okay, thank you. I want to revisit something that we talked about when you were on the stand previously, and that relates to the generation adder. And I thought I understood your response at that time, but in thinking about it, continue to be a little confused. So I just have one question about this, and I just want to make sure that the record is clear. So as I understand it, you added this particular rate element to address an interaction between residential choice and residential non-choice customers. Is that, I mean, very broadly, is that correct? Is that fair? Or if not, could you put it in your own words?
At a very high level, that is correct. To provide a little more context to that, what that did was within the residential class, and I don't have the settlement before me right now, but within the settlement, you see the 18+% for residential. And then you also see in, I believe it's Exhibit A on the electric side that included how the breakout for the settlement increase overall is split between distribution and generation. And so if you look at just the logic of how that would translate into the 18%, without any additional adjustments, what you do see is that while you achieve the 18.2% for residential class as a whole, it doesn't get you can see more disparate impacts when you look at further detail, like take another segmentation between choice and non-choice residential. And so the introduction of the generation adder was to start to levelize those impacts between residential choice and residential non-choice.
Right. And I think I do understand what you're saying. So I went to look at how many residential choice customers you have. Do you know how many Northwest residential choice?
It's a small.
2?
I don't have that in front of me,
Well,
but it is a small
it's in the
number.
record. that the number is 2. So given that, well,
Mr.
assume that
President.
is,
I'm sorry, I'm going to object to Mr. McGraw testifying that it's 2 in the record. If you'd like to point where it is in the record, that would be appropriate.
it's not necessary, Mr. President. I'll rephrase.
All right.
Assuming the number is 2, can you, does that inform a decision or determination on your part? Or how did that inform a determination on your part to perform this or add this particular line item on the generation adder? Does the number being, assuming the number is vanishingly small, does that make any difference to you? Or did that make any difference to you?
In making the adjustment, it was recognized that it was a small number. With that, it's the same adjustment, an equivalent adjustment as what we did to the other customer group. This was, and I apologize. We made a similar adjustment to the GS2 substation group to have with the introduction of the generation demand charge to sort of levelize the impact between choice and non-choice customers. So it was a similar adjustment that we made there. And it really was to help sort of manage customer expectations between choice and non-choice when you look at the allocations for the customer class as a whole, so that one segment within that overall customer class isn't surprised by a difference in rate impact that's going to be so different than what everybody's seeing as far as expectations for the residential group. So we did recognize that it was a small subset of the total residential class, but still felt it was appropriate among the settling parties.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. McGraw. Mr. Uda?
No questions.
Renewable Northwest?
Good morning, Ms. Fang. Barbara Chilcott with Renewable Northwest.
Good morning.
I want to ask you a question about back to the reliability rider. So my question is, if the commission does not approve the settlement and the reliability rider is back on the table in this case, if the commission approves the rider, what additional approvals would be required from the commission prior to costs being recovered through the reliability rider?
Give me just 1 second. So when you look at my rebuttal testimony, you'll see that in response to the concerns from parties as far as the timing of when there would be a prudency review compared to the in-service date and when implementation recovery of costs were to begin. In my rebuttal, this is CSF 15. It talks about how no later than 100 days after the implementation of interim rates, which would be the in-service date of Yellowstone Generating Station, the utility would file an application with the commission for approval of the acquisition and associated costs. So the implementation of cost recovery would begin on an interim basis with the process for a prudence review to begin no later than 180 days after that implementation.
Okay, thank you. And on that, your same rebuttal testimony that you're referring to now on page 11, you discuss in response to the concerns raised with regard to the reliability rider, you say on line 10 of page 11, just let me know when you're there.
There.
You say that the reliability rider includes a multi-step reporting process that provides a high level of transparency to the commission. And you include a few different, 3 different kind of reporting processes there. And of those processes, which ones require actual commission approval?
With the reliability rider, because the implementation is on an interim basis, as proposed, it would be at the prudence review where we're looking for approval of final rates.
Okay, thanks. So currently, is construction ongoing for the Yellowstone County Generating Station?
I do not believe that is the case.
As of now, do you know when the in-service date would be?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Chilcott. MEIC,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Ms. Hartman.
Good morning, Ms. Fang.
Good morning.
I just want to confirm my understanding of the stipulated revenue requirement from your testimony last week. Is it your
Ms. Hartman,
understanding?
can you check to see if your microphone's on, please?
Is it your understanding that that stipulated revenue requirement includes the entire rate base that was reflected in ADD3 as updated in rebuttal testimony? And I'm speaking on the electric side.
So if I can refer you to Exhibit A of Exhibit Joint 1, sorry, yes. And if you take a look at Exhibit A of Joint 1, what you should see is in the lines aren't numbered, but it's the sort of boxed in blue in bold, where it says rebuttal revenue increase. Those numbers should be what's reflected so it incorporates all of the adjustments that were reflected in Northwestern's rebuttal testimony. So from that number, you'll see the adjustments from the settlement revenue adjustment. So there's a line item that identifies the reduction in revenue requirement associated with the change to ROE, the line item that shows the reduction in revenue requirement associated to depreciation, and then the unspecified amount to get to the stipulated revenue increase. So that first line where it says rebuttal revenue requirement increase should reflect Northwestern's total electric revenue requirement with all of those adjustments.
Okay, thank you for helping me with that. That's all I have for you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hartman. Time for commissioner questions. Vice President Fielder. No questions. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yes, Mr. President, and I have some questions. It's awkward because I have a paper here that I want to ask questions on, and it just says Exhibit C, stipulated electric rates inclusive of property taxes. I want to ask a question. I made copies of this. If you want to
Miss,
look, I don't know what document this comes from.
I have Exhibit C if that,
Okay, so this is page 1, apparently.
okay?
So under the category, it says residential, including low income. There's the categories generation, CU4 rate, generation adder, transmission rate, and distribution rate. And then there is current and settlement, and then the change. So on the generation rate, excluding CU4, the rate here is 1.5% increase. The CU4 rate, this is the rate without property tax, also goes up just 1.5%. Under transmission rate, revenue without property tax, it increases 45%. And distribution rate on the next line is 38%. And I apologize if I was traveling on commission business last week, if you addressed all this, but I'm curious as to why those transmission and distribution rates are so significant of an increase.
Is it possible for me to reference our work papers? Like, it'll take us a minute to get them in front of me. I can talk through that.
Yes. Bobby?
And Mr. President, while that's being done, I just want to clarify for the record that what Commissioner O'Donnell is asking about is for the record and clarity, it's Exhibit C that's attached to Exhibit Joint 1, which is the stipulation and settlement.
Thank you.
So I'll just talk through it if that works, rather than pull up the workbook. Is that, or
Commissioner O'Donnell, is it all right if she gives this answer? Do you want a copy of the workbook in front of you?
No, it's fine, perfectly fine.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Fang.
So when I was initially describing how the increase works, what you see in Exhibit Joint 1 in the settlement agreement is the table that shows an 18.2 increase to residential overall. And this is base rate and settlement, base rate and property tax included in that. So that in addition, we have, and this is in the Exhibit A that shows how much of that increase is associated with our base rates versus how much of it is property tax. So basically what you do is you take that 18%, you split out the property tax piece to find the base rate piece. And then next, what you have to do is find the difference between the T&D increase versus the fixed gen. So when you go into the property tax increase, the property tax increase at the system level is just under 13%. So then you have a portion of the increase that's associated with base revenue requirements, and the majority of that ended up being in base T&D. So what you see is base T&D saw a 30% increase, whereas fixed gen saw a 1% increase. And then you have one more adjustment, which is for our residential customers, we're not including the monthly service fee. So no increase to the monthly service fee. So that means if you take that portion of the 30% increase and then only allow it to happen to just the energy charges, it causes that percentage to go up again. So it had to do with how we had to define how it was going to show up on the customer's rates. So as we pulled out the property tax impact, limiting it there, and then the generation impact, eliminating that there, the T&D impact, we had to exclude the monthly service fee. So it caused that number to go up even higher as far as percentage change. But the dollars collected are still the same to get to an 18.2% increase in average. Would it help if I pulled up the worksheet? I'm sorry.
Not necessarily. As I've admitted before, I'm never took an accounting or economics course in my life. The numbers are not something that I focus on, but the textual information. So this is new to me. But what it sounds like what you said was that in order to achieve a certain total rate, that this was somewhat arbitrary on how it was broken out between generation, T&D, and all the rest of the things. It was like it was done in this way in order to justify, or in order to come up with an end figure. I just don't understand why. And I was careful to use the lines without property tax on there. It just seemed like that was an incredibly high rise in in transmission, 45%. Why the revenue increased by that much? It just struck me as being extraordinary.
Yeah, so it wasn't arbitrary. The reason that it increased by that much is because when you think about the T&D base for residential customers, that increase to T&D base, it's 31% overall. And then for residential, it was basically, it's like 38% when you go through, add the allocation portion to it. And then you end up having to exclude that increase from the monthly service fee. And if you give me just a second to do so. The monthly service fee is almost 17% of the total revenues for residential. So you can only recover that 37% increase from, it's basically less than 85% of the revenues that are recovered in the energy rate. So that's why that made that number go up. So it's not arbitrary. It's just the only way that we can make sure that we were covered the right dollars from the residential class while not increasing their monthly service fee.
Again, I'm having a lot of difficulty in explaining what it is that I'm curious about. Is that you said that the transmission rate overall 31%. I'm saying why? I'm just curious why those transmission and distribution costs have risen so much.
If you look at, it's in Exhibit A, it shows how the difference between the property tax increase showed up. If you give me 1 second. So if you look at Exhibit A, what you see is that the first 3 columns are basically the base rates, so they exclude property tax. And what you see is that under the settlement, it's basically 67 million in total, but only 3 million is associated with generation and 64 million is associated with T&D. So that's why you see the transmission go up much more than you see the generation. Was that better?
Still, I'm asking questions on more of a philosophical thing of understanding, and you're explaining things rightfully so in terms of dollars and cents, and it's 2 different languages. So, but I, I'll just leave it at that. Is that I just wondered why those costs in particular, like has transmission costs increased 47%? That's what I'm trying to get at. You know, what happened to cause transmission rates to go up 47%? That's what I don't know. So you're referring to the numbers that justify it. I get all that, you know. I just don't know why that happened.
It is that transmission and distribution. So our T&D costs went up by that much more than our generation costs.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Commissioner Pinochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. No questions.
Very pleased with your cell phone now. They're hidden. So what we're going to do here is I have no questions for this witness. So what we'll do is we will break for lunch at this point in time. I know Commissioner Bukacek does have a question for you. She'd like some time to formulate that over the lunch hour. So what we will do is we will break for lunch. We will return at 1 o'clock. We will pick up with Commissioner Bukacek at that time.